Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
We now are the opposition party in the United Kingdom to the Labour Party, and the Tories are toast.
Fighting talk there from Reform leader Nigel Farage after his party clinched a by-election win. Is it a new era for UK politics? Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Hepker.
And I'm Yuan. Welcome to our election roundup programme. Now, Nigel Farage has long promised that Reform UK would shake up British politics. And over the last year, his claims have become more and more bold. He now says he's aiming for Downing Street. Well, this week's elections are the first real tests of those lofty aspirations and, crucially, the first proper electoral test of Keir Starmer's government. We don't have many local election results yet, but Reform have snatched the Runcorn and Ailbhe by-election, overturning a 14,000 Labour majority, and former Tory Andrea Jenkins has won a convincing victory in the Lincolnshire mayoral race, giving Reform their first taste of executive power. But Caroline, I think the really interesting question is, when all the dust settles on these results, how does Reform behave in power, and how and who do they work with in other parties?
Yes, that's one question, but there's also the Conservative and Labour performance to look at. Doesn't make for particularly happy reading, really, for either party, though Keir Starmer will be relieved to have held on in several of the close mayoral contests. And 6 months to the day since she took over as leader of the opposition, Conservative colleagues will be picking apart the results for what they say about Kemi Badenoch's performance. Fundamentally, is Britain's historic two-party system really on the way out?
Yeah, well, that is a key question. Our associate editor, Ailbhe, has been in Runcorn in sunny Cheshire. Ailbhe, a night of drama, the tightest by-election in British electoral history. How was your night?
So I am back in London now, I will caveat, but I have been in Runcorn for most of the week, picking up the mood among voters, and it was always going to be close. And yes, we've been up since early this morning following this drama. As you were saying, Nigel Farage's party clinched it by 6 votes after a recount. So quite a dramatic result.
Well, here's what Ipsos's CEO Ben Page made of the results. Have a listen.
But it just shows how volatile our politics are. It's perfectly possible that Nigel Farage could become a prime minister one day. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it just shows how volatile it is.
So that was Ben Page, the CEO of Ipsos. I mean, is that a step too far? We're a long way from a general election, and Reform UK have only got a handful of MPs. Can we read so much, Ailbhe, into this result?
I think that's one of the big questions. I mean, just to dwell on the result before we extrapolate out from it, this is really quite a big blow. You know, was a very safe seat for Labour. They won 52.9% of the vote here only a few months ago in the general election last year. And so Reform have really overturned a massive majority to win here. There are some sort of health warnings that come with by-elections because they are quite unusual. It is quite normal for incumbent governments to lose them, but still, just given the size of Labour's majority, it is quite a big blow. And as you say, it comes in the context of these wider election victories for Farage, progress really across the board, where they've been picking up council seats, mostly at the expense of the Conservatives, and they've won, as you said, their first ever mayoral seat, so their first experience of executive power. It's difficult to really pronounce on whether this is going to be a permanent shift, because of course Nigel Farage has had several political parties. He had UKIP, he had Brexit. They have won by-elections in the past. They've done very well in some local and European elections, most notably in 2019 European elections. The Brexit Party was the biggest party in the UK. So there's a question as to whether this will be permanent, but it does build on Reform's success at the last general election where they got 5 MPs. And so I think that this, it's difficult to tell at this point whether this is a permanent shift in electoral politics, but what is certain is that this will be really difficult and unnerving for both of the main parties. It will launch a big discussion within the Labour Party about how they tackle the rise of the populist right, whether they need a change of strategy. There'll be a debate within the party about that because they're not all on the same page on what they should do next. And then the even bigger challenge is for Kemi Badenoch, who's facing a difficult day because there are more results yet to come and it's not looking good for her. As you said, her leadership, it's 6 months to the day since she became leader. That leadership is already looking a little bit under threat.
Ailbhe, the turnout was 30%, in the region of 30%. We expect low turnouts in by-elections these days. But I'm interested in the conversations you had with voters in Runcorn. What was your sense of their feeling, particularly towards reform? Obviously, many of them went out and voted for reform. But what was the feeling you got from the other voters? Were a lot of people against reform as well?
Good question, because I think that's exactly it. There was a very strong pro-reform vote and a very strong anti-reform vote, basically, and it was mostly expressed in those terms. So I met plenty of people who were voting reform, concerned about immigration and crime in the local area. That was a big focus of Sarah Potchin, the reform candidate's campaign. And a lot of people saying that, they're sick of Labour, that Labour has let them down. But equally, there were lots of people who still are not necessarily terribly happy with the way the Labour Party has been governing since they won the election last year, who still nevertheless said that they were voting against reform, that they didn't want to let Nigel Farage in. So actually, for all that this has been a bad result for Labour, it could have been even worse because some of those unenthusiastic voters might not have been motivated to turn out had Farage not been the opponent. So still an example of how Farage is still a very divisive politician in Britain, even though he is very popular in some quarters.
Ailbhe, yes, thank you so much for being with us. Our associate editor, Ailbhe Ray there, who's been in Runcorn in Cheshire, of course, which actually came up as a seat for contest, a by-election, because of Mike Amesbury, the video of the MP hitting someone and then being ousted from the Labour Party. So that was the kind of inception of that. Ailbhe, thanks for being with us. Let's bring in our political editor, Alex Wickham, then. For your big thought, then, on this, as we say, key test for the incumbent Labour government about, 8-9 months after the general election, the local elections, mayoral, and then this by-election. What did you make of them, Alex?
Thing that in number 10 they will be thinking about this morning and over the coming weeks and months is, we think we've got the right formula to keep our coalition of voters together, which is broadly being tough on crime and immigration and trying to improve the economy and get economic growth. But how do we deliver? And that is the thing that they are getting frustrated about in government. They are, they really do believe that they're right in terms of their strategy, but they are not convinced yet that they are making the changes, and clearly voters aren't either, that are necessary to win elections. And that comes across through the very high numbers of small boat crossings over the English Channel so far this year. That will be a key factor in reform's surge. That is something that is obviously a very difficult problem to solve. Rishi Sunak failed to deal with it. So far, the Labour government is failing to deal with it. They will need to come up with a way of making sure that those numbers come down well in time for the next election. Otherwise, they are in very bad trouble. That is definitely a main takeaway for number 10. I suspect we might see some very robust sounding immigration policies coming up, particularly in the immigration white paper, which is being written at the moment, as they try to kind of, as they would say, double down on their existing, tough position on migration, particularly illegal migration. But the reality will be getting results is what matters. But I think the flip side of that is that is not the only reason that Labour isn't as popular as it was 9 months ago. And there are voters who, as Ailbhe was describing in Runcorn, are kind of traditional Labour voters, typically on the left, who, want a more redistributive society and higher tax for the wealthy, who will have seen things that Labour has done since coming in that first budget, in terms of taking away winter fuel allowance for pensioners and some of the changes to disability benefits, and they'll be worried about that, and they'll be saying, hang on a minute, this isn't what I thought we were going to do. And the challenge, I think, for Keir Starmer is how does he keep both of those kind of two types of voter happy, because they're different types of voter, and it's kind of he's a victim of his own success in a way from the big majority. He got lots of different types of people to vote for him in the election last year. Keeping that broad coalition together is his challenge now.
Facing in two directions at the same time. Alex, I was struck by Labour's vote share in the by-election. 38% is actually not that bad for a midterm by-election. That is not a disastrous vote share for Labour. Do you think the hope in Downing Street will be that the Labour Party, when it's facing reform, can gather up the votes of the other parties, the Greens and the Lib Dems, and borrow those votes to shore up their own base? Do you think there's some at least a glimmer of hope there?
Oh, definitely. And this is why nobody at Number 10 is saying, "Oh my goodness, this is a total catastrophe. We're on the way out." They're and this is why they are convinced that they've got the right strategy, because they still believe that they, and they do have a very clear path to winning the next election. I'm sure they are the overwhelming favourites to win the next election, in 2028 at the moment, and it is because of that reason. The Conservative Party is bluntly nowhere, and faces a huge task to be a credible threat to Labour in time for the next election. Yeah. And Nigel Farage is not universally popular and is a very divisive figure, and there may well be a ceiling to his vote, as Ailbhe was saying. Lots of people voting against Farage rather than for any other reason for the Labour Party.
Lastly, Alex, just reflect on whether we are seeing a change, moving away from a two-party system more towards, a five-party system in the UK, as we know that the world and Britain is more politically divided, perhaps even more extreme on the edges. Is that the route that Britain is going down?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a bit of that. And the caveat is, at local elections, minor parties tend to do better. People want to register their frustration with the government. There are local issues that are at play, and certainly, traditionally, it is a good time for Nigel Farage, whether he's UKIP, Brexit Party, or now Reform, to have a good showing in the polls. Yeah. Same with the Lib Dems, same with the Greens. So, yes, it is certainly the case that politics and the vote is more fragmented than it has been in the past, and that is a massive challenge for the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, traditionally the main two parties. I think Labour will be still relatively relaxed about its position. They still have a huge majority in Parliament where it matters. It's the Conservatives who will be worried, because nobody's threatening replacing the Labour Party at the moment, but the Conservatives do face a very serious and credible threat of being overrun as the number two party, and that is where the sort of big change is happening. And of course, Labour are losing votes to Reform as well. But Reform's main aim is to destroy and take over the Conservative Party. That is their main objective, and it will be up to it's a very hard task. In Kemi Badenoch's defence, whoever was the Conservative leader would be facing an extremely difficult challenge at the moment after the unpopularity of that party since before the election. But that is going to be the challenge for them over the next few years.
Okay. Alex, thank you so much for being with us. Bloomberg's political editor, Alex Wickham.
Yeah, so big questions to the big two parties, as Alex says. But I think the fascinating challenge for reform is that they've got to move on from just Nigel Farage's bold claims and all his bold language. And actually, they're going to be in government and getting their hands dirty in the sometimes quite boring and difficult work of local government. And they'll be judged on that in a year's time. And that's something that's completely new for them.
Yeah. That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and our audio engineer was Sean Guastamakia. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm Caroline Hepker. We'll be back with more next week. This is Bloomberg.